let's get started on lab 3. Oddly enough, the first part is what it always is. Open a new window and name it correctly. I already have one open, but you can open another one. If you don't save it immediately, it's going to force you to, but you might as well save it. So we're going to do, this one's all about playing with our turtles and learning to use some of the new stuff we learned in the last lecture. So we're going to use the import statements, we're going to use our turtle commands, and we're going to learn to make shapes. So start off with our comment up here. And I did not name this, but so remember, you always want to do your importing first, because if you don't import it, you can't use the commands with the turtle. It'll tell you it's undefined. Our turtle needs a place to live, so let's create a window for him. Then this example, the turtle is named Alex. You are absolutely perfectly free to name your turtle whatever you want to. I'm just going to copy along with the examples. So after we've imported and we wrote the code to create the window and the turtle, we can run it and make sure that it's working. I suggest that you do that every now and then, because you'd hate to have a typo and not find it till later, like I do. Ah, see, I can't spell turtle. So we have our turtle in the middle of the screen. If you want it to look like a turtle, now would be the time to put in the turtle.shape. Not required in the lab, but I kind of like my turtle to look like a turtle, so I'm going to put it in there. And then I'm going to tell Alex to pick his pen up. And I'm going to send Alex to the corner. So remember we talked about the coordinate system in the window that we created. I'm going to move my turtle to the top left corner by telling it to go to negative 300, 300. So if you go left of center, you use a negative X. You're going above the Y, the X axis and moving up, you use positive Y. So if I do this, instead of the turtle being in the center, I will have moved him up to the top. Right? Oops, back. Now I want to put my pen down because I'm ready to start drawing. So I put the pin down. I'm going to tell him to move forward. I'm going to tell him to turn right. And the next set of executable code is just repeating the same two lines. So anybody getting an idea of what we're fixing to draw? I got a right. I got a 90-degree corner. I got equal distant lengths on sides. We're fixing to make a box or a square. So if I run this, I should have a line across the top, right? And he's turning facing down now. So he's going to draw the downward one next. So I'm lazy. It's the exact same lines. So I copy pasted them, right? Now I should have two lines. So the code, the directions you're reading, have you saved this after every line because it's trying to get you in a habit of doing a little bit of code, save and run, do a little bit of code, save and run. But we're going to go ahead and do the other two sides because for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and put them in. Do you have to put the blank line in between? No, I'm doing that for y'all's readability. Let me see if I can make this scroll up some where you can see more. So we have 4 sets of forward and turn right. So we should have a box now when we run it. Right? And he's back exactly where he started from, facing exactly in the direction that he was originally facing. Okay. So our next thing, after we draw this box, we go to step 12, and it's telling us to pick our pin up and go to a new location and put the pin down. Right? If you forget to pick the pin up, it's going to draw a line to your new location. So based on the new location or the coordinates I put in, the new location should be at the same Y axis. It's just going to move right across the screen because it's going towards a positive number, right? So this corner is, forget that I have video. If this corner is negative 300, 300, this one is 300 spaces over, so that's 0. Because negative 300 plus 300 is 0. 300, because we didn't move up and down. So the second coordinate didn't change. Y'all are just not going to talk to me today. Okay. It's going to keep going until y'all tell me to stop. So now if I run it, I draw a box, and I move the turtle over to the side. Right? Now we want to add code to draw a second box. Well, you already know how to draw a box, right? We just did it. Is there anything you have to do different to draw a box from this starting position than when we drew the box from the other starting position? No, it's exactly the same. So you could grab all of this code right here, copy it, and paste it. And when you run it, you should have two boxes side by side. Right? Yes, sir.
When did you have to change the values? Because it's like, so if the first box is 300, like, are you just guessing where it's gonna be if it's not on like a number line or whatever?
No. I'm not guessing at all. Because forward moves exactly the number of pixels you put inside of the parentheses. Right? So if I do the math on my grid, I can figure out where to put my turtle before I start drawing to put the boxes next to each other, because all the boxes are going to be 300 by 300. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but like, you can't see the pixels.
No, you cannot see the pixels. This is where you have to do a little planning. I strongly suggest a piece of paper and a pencil, and you kind of draw it out and sketch it. I knew that 300 pixels would fit on the screen because I knew how big the window roughly is. You guys could do a little research and find out from the documentation how big the window is, or you can do a little trial and error and figure out how far that is. But once you figure out where your starting point and stuff is, you can calculate mathematically where you need to go to do the rest of it.
So would it be possible to draw a circle?
Not easily. Drawing a circle is not as easy by hand as you would think, because pixels are square. So it's not really drawing a circle, it's doing like offset pixels. There is actually a command in the turtle file that will draw a circle for you. So you don't have to reinvent that wheel. You just have to tell it how big you want the circle to be and where you want to start it at. Because if you zoom in really close to a picture and it gets pixelated, same thing with the drawing, it's kind of a pixelated, jagged line. At it, especially for curves. So now we have two boxes next to each other. So we have a lot of code here that looks the same, right? So this is where I was talking about refactoring. This is a prime example of where you could refactor this into something that used less lines of code, made it easier to read, easier to do. So our next step is to refactor this into something shorter. So if we think about our loops, we could use a loop to do this and not have as many lines of code, right? And since loops are what we introduced this time, we're gonna change our code now to use for loops instead of all those lines of code we just typed. You're going, why did you make me type all the code? Because you needed to practice. So we're going to go in now to the first box, which starts right here. And we're going to write a loop to make this less lines of code. It's going to do exactly the same thing, but it's going to be less lines of code, right? So if we put a for loop in here and we did for I in range 4, so if you type that first line and you put the colon at the end and hit enter, it automatically indents the next line where you need it to be. So idle will help you line your code up if you let it. Does that make sense? And it will continue to indent lines every time you hit enter until you force it back over out of the indent. Does that make sense? So if I do this 4 times, I now don't need all of this code because it's just going to repeat the 2 lines inside the loop. Right? Make sense? So I can delete these lines of code. And then I can come down here to this box and do exactly the same thing. I can get rid of the 3 sides here. I can put a for loop in. And the hard part with for loops is remembering to put the colon at the end of the for line because we haven't been putting anything at the end of our lines before that, right? A regular single line of code doesn't have any kind of punctuation at the end, but a loop has a colon to indicate that it's starting, needs to do that, start the lines that belong to the for loop. You were doing Java, there's a lot more punctuation involved, but so if I run it now, I still should have 2 boxes. And I do, absolutely do. And I have a whole lot less code to do it. Right? And isn't that neater and cleaner and easier to read than the other way? Glad you agree. So that is all of part 1B. We've used our dry principle. We haven't repeated ourselves too much. And we have refactored code. So those terms that we introduced and will probably show up on your quizzes and exams at some point, been put to use. So let's go to part 2. We're going to do a comment to tell it we're starting part 2. So part 2, compute. So we're going to compute the average car price now. But see how my line is still indented? It still thinks I'm in the for loop. Because I haven't typed anything that the computer reads or that idle's going to read because the comment line doesn't count. So I'm going to hit the backspace key to take us back over to that line to make sure that it doesn't try to run the next thing I put in inside the for loop. So reading through this really quickly, we're going to it looks like we're going to prompt the user for the number of cars they want to input. We're going to convert that to a number. We're going to use the accumulator, which is another for loop, to sum up the prices of the car. So let's get that started. So we need to create a variable called number of cars. And we're going to set it equal to an input statement. we're going to immediately change that from a string to an integer because we want to be able to do math with it in a little while. We also need a value to hold the sum. And sum is a keyword, so I'm going to change that in mine because I just don't like having keywords as variables. So I'm just going to call it total. You can leave it as sum, that's up to you. Just kind of one of my quirks of how my programming style. I don't like to use any of the keywords as variables if I can help it. Because then I can't go back and look at the color coding as easily. Because some will say purple. All right, so I'm going to set it equal to 0. Once I do that, yes, sir.
Why would you set it to 0 if you're gonna put in? Like, yeah, like why would you set it to 0?
Because you always want to give your variables an initial value if you can. That way you don't ever run into a problem where it's empty, and that sometimes you forget to put a value in it, and you try to do math with an empty variable, and you'll get an error message telling you that you can't do that because it's empty, there's no value found, things like that. So I just go ahead and initially put in a dummy value, because that way I don't ever have a null pointer exception or something like that. And null means empty in computer science. So also, Python doesn't give a variable a type until you put something in it. So if you don't set it equal to something, it's going to not really know what type that variable is. So now I'm going to use a for loop again. And we're going to use the number our users give us for how many times this loop is going to run. So I'm going to use the variable name that's holding the number of cars inside of the parentheses as my parameter instead of a fixed number. With a square, we know we knew we were going to do 4 sides. So it makes sense to use a fixed number. The squares don't have more than 4 sides. But this way, if we use a variable name, we make it reusable. It doesn't matter how many cars the user wants to use. It's just going to keep running until it's totaled them all up. So inside of this loop, we now need to prompt the user for the price of each car, right? So we want to add the loop body. We're going to prompt the user for the price of the car and assign it to a price variable. When the program is running and entering a price, you will not use the $sign or commas in your pricing because we're not doing the formatting on that. So it's just going to take the number. It's not going to make it look like they have $sign or something in front of it. We're going to convert the price to a float after the user inputs it, because money has decimal places, and we're going to add it to the sum. That makes sense. So in here, we're going to have price equals input So do I want to ask it to input the price of the first car? What do I want it to say in this loop? They just,
car and then whatever iteration
right,
and it starts at zeros.
right. So for simplicity's sake, we're just going to say enter price. But later we're going to teach you how to format it where you tell it enter the price for car one, enter the price for car two, and it'll go up every time. But for this, right now, we're going to make it simple because adding a string together is absolutely doable, but it's a little more complexity. So this is in the simplest form is how you prompt the user for the prices, right? And then I need to print the total. All right, let's run it, make sure it works. Still drawing a box. You have to click back in the show window to do the rest of it. Let's say I want to enter 3 car prices. Let's do used cars because I don't want to do bigger numbers. Right? It asked me for 3 different prices and it totaled it up. A couple of heads nodding. Thumbs up if you're with me, we're ready to go. You need me to wait a few more minutes to let you copy code. Now would be a good time to say something. You have an error. Let me see what kind of error you have. You have a big error. Show up to window, option. Yeah, it closes when you do that. You just close it. Have the directions open. If you'll go back to the directions, second, all that. So the one you should- you just do that. I'll come back to it. All right. If you close out of the box while it's still running, it'll give you a weird runtime error. So just ignore that and restart the program. So we've done this, we've printed the sum. We saved and executed it. We now can remove this print statement because we really want the average. So I'm just gonna comment it out because I kind of like to see them. I might need it again later if I do something or change something. You can comment it out or you can completely remove it. Either way is fine with me. When I grade it, if it's commented out, I'm okay with that. Now, don't leave it live because it'll make the flow of your program weird. So after we do that, we want to get the average. So we want to add code to compute the average price by dividing the sum by the number of cars assigned to it. So the average is going to be equal to total divided by number of cars, right? And then we want to print out something that looks like this. This is what the output should kind of look like. So in here, I'm going to do print right? Does that make sense? You notice the directions are getting a little more vague and a lot less exactly what you need to type because we want you to be able to do this on your own as we go forward. Yes, sir.
This is the one that's not working.
The print line.
Yeah, it says average is not fine. Find it.
Okay, that's fine. I'm coming. But it's running. You didn't print it. Right. All right. We're having some weird errors, so, you know, that's normal. All right, so if I run this, I should have it print out the average now. This is why I told you later, You might want to speed your turtle up because every time you test it, you have to watch the turtle draw. So mine's working. Yours should be working because you have exactly the same code. Doesn't mean that it always works out that way though. So we're now down to part 3. Part 3 wants us to print the suits in a deck of cards. And we give you a list of the suits. So hearts, diamonds, clubs, spades. And you're just going to print them out. Right? So we are going to have a for loop. And we're going to do one suit at a time in the list. Lists always are in square brackets of hearts. Boy, I wish I could type today. Diamonds. Clubs. Spades. Close our list. Don't forget your colon at the end. And then very simply, we're just going to tell it to print suits. Suit. Singular suit. Right? Now, the only thing missing here is I forgot step 2. I forgot the print statement to set it up. Now, if I run this, now I should print out a list, print out each thing in the list one line at a time. Right? So part 3 was the easy one, right? It just made you use a for loop doing it with a different thing. We're using a for loop with a list, and we've used a for loop in a range. So you've practiced using a for loop in a range with a constant or a set number. You used a for loop in a range with a variable, and you've used a for loop in a list. Does that make sense? Everybody good with that? That is all of lab 3. If it's working, save it, submit it, move on to assignment 3. If it's not working, sit still and I'm going to come help you get it done. Let me stop the video.